just to really take it apart about how different we are within the driven community. Most of those do fit, but some people are very left hemisphere dominant. And if you're driven left hemisphere, you tend to go more OCD. If you're right hemisphere dominant, you're much more impulsive and fun, because I'm right hemisphere dominant. We're all a little different, but the underlying qualities of that, big picture thinking seem to fall out pretty consistently. The resilience that we have is one of the most consistent findings. We are incredibly resilient, even though we don't feel like it necessarily, meaning that this neuropeptide Y, which is a neurochemical I write about in my book, but it's, as a hunter, we're chasing a rabbit gets away, and we go, another rabbit. The moment we shift into the next thing, we can drop consequences almost immediately. Like, we get over stuff right now, and obvious benefit. And, that is where, the addiction cycle really falls into place, where you don't think about the consequences. And, it is both, I keep running to that theme. It is a huge gift and a curse. I mean, it truly is.
Right. Yeah. What's interesting, me and Dan Sullivan and Babs, the first brain scan I had done was in 2010 with Eamon. And we went down there, and one of the things that always struck me as really interesting is, Eamon personally did my scan. I interviewed him while I was there. He went over my stuff, and he said to me, he was showing my brain, the way my brain lights up and the frontal lobe stuff. He said, it looks like you have some sort of frontal lobe damage. I go, was it possible? As I used to do? He goes, no, it looks like you maybe got hit. And there was a couple of times where I was, punched in the face. I was attacked. I got hit with a baseball. I used to ride BMX bikes. And one time I went over the handlebar and smacked and I don't know if I was ever unconscious, but no one was around. I just remember being dazed, but I could have been, I have no idea, but all this sort of stuff. And then I became a drug addict, right? So I had all this stuff, and he said, you're very impulsive. And so I was like, yeah, I kind of know that one. There was a resting scan and then an active scan. So the resting scan, you would kind of meditate in darkness and no noise and just try. And then there's the active scan where you're doing word puzzles and, triangles and squares and numbers and memorization, and just scramble the brain, keep it very active, and scanned both ways. And he said, if you're not busy, you're not a happy guy. And I thought that was an interesting statement, because what I've learned more and more from your work, the thing with telling someone to relax or to calm down, or well-intentioned farmers actually think they're suggesting things. It drives hunters nuts. And as a matter of fact, it doesn't help at all in some cases. It makes it worse. And so it's one of those things where I used to say this, I don't know how anyone could ever get bored. There's so much to do. There's so much to read. And then I realized I get bored all the time. I can be bored out of my mind in massive busyness. And so what happens is, if addiction becomes a route of coping or dealing with life, you become pleasure deaf. And then normal things that a farmer would find pleasurable, going for a walk, a hunter's bored out of their mind. So my question to you is, as a gift, how does one contend with this? Now, your book, I'm saying this, speaking for everyone, you lay out a bunch of stuff in your book, including the meditation. What do you do with this?
So you build an understanding of how you work as the human animal. And as I say in the book 10 times, boredom is a lie. Your central nervous system, your body is sending a signal to the neocortex that is not accurate based upon reality. And so if you're believing your emotion, feelings are not facts. And so that ability to actually step out of your emotion and then reality check is what meditation actually is. And so we feel these sensations in our body, and those very quickly, if they're believed, come up into the monkey mind, into the narrative brain. And we come up with narratives explaining and justifying why those feelings are accurate. And, that's what sheep do, is they get captured by the narrative. They get captured in that because of our brain structure and because of the way we work, we have the unique ability to actually step out of our emotion, where many people don't, and step out of our narrative. And so if you were driven and just believing the emotion, and really running, trying to get to a place in this imaginary world where I'm going to finally get there, when I finally reach the finish line, then I can relax. There is no finish line. I mean, there truly isn't. The other dopamine receptor that I find much more interesting, because it hits me too much harder, is the FOMO gene. And so dopamine receptor number 4, if you think about hunters, we always feel like there's more woolly mammoths over the next hill. And so this feeling that, the grass is greener over there, and we're using that feeling as a reference point. Oh my God, it's going to be so great when I finally, and we use that as a reference for the present moment. Right now kind of sucks. And if we get stuck in those loops, then you're really never satisfied. So on top of boredom, feeling like there's something missing or wrong, it's always going to be this way. And, unless you develop insight, unless you really take a look at yourself, and that's what my next book is about, is the true gift of driven is that we have the capacity to, hyper-focus, which I hone that into all the meditations that I do. Particular, I do use long-range shooting, because it's the deduction. I have built ridiculous number of guns. Some of them accurately shoot out to a mile. I mean, I've got some 375 Chiteks that can literally go a mile and put on accurate, but there is no recoil in the present. Meaning that, as you are experiencing true meditation, where you're not concerned about the present, you're only focused on the present, using our gift as driven, you can really let go of the future. And in that, when you hone that practice, and then you can ask yourself with your big picture thinking, just what am I doing? Without all the shame, without all the, really, what am I doing? And you can rest in that. It turns into this capacity to be honest with yourself like nothing other I've experienced. The guys I've worked with, long-term clients I've worked with 10 plus years, I mean, it is such a gift. It is unfair advantage of being driven in this world. But we've got to work through that shame. We got to work through the identity. You got to do the work. If you do the work, it is a huge gift. If you don't, it's just a matter of time before you show your life.
Yeah, I think I talk more openly about it than most people I know from the addictive standpoint. I was a millionaire before the age of 30. I was actively, mired in workaholism, sex addiction. I did an interview with Pat Carnes, who's a top sex addiction doctor in the world, probably 12 years ago, and he talked about an arousal template, and that CEOs at the time, drug of choice was paying for sex. His estimate were 60% of CEOs pay for sex. And I don't know if that's accurate or not. And certainly with the internet and porn and everything, we're talking about highly charged, sexualized individuals. And your arousal template in the field of sexuality is what you're aroused to sexually. But in terms of everyone here is aroused by certain things. It could be activities, it could be business deals, it could be music, it could be sports, it could be a bunch of stuff. And when your arousal template is desiring things that are destructive and are damaging to you, that because you have a hunger for things that are poisoning you simultaneously. And it took so much work. I mean, I was so frustrated at times because it was definitely not for a lack of seeking and pursuing. I mean, I did so much. I spent over $500,000 on therapy and treatments and all kinds of stuff. And it finally was just sheer sticking with it, sitting through hundreds of 12-step meetings, tons of therapy, plant medicines, I mean, you name it. And, when I first did my brain scan with Amen, I started doing hyperbaric oxygen. I went and got trained in transcendental meditation in 2013, started different supplements. And now it's, I'm going on close to 7 years, this year will be 7 years of not having any bottom line sexual acting out behaviors. For anyone that's interested, what that means is paying for sex. I used to pay for sex. And I would feel tons of shame, and so much of it was based on, trauma from a kid. But what I've learned recently from my friend Dr. Anna Lemke, who wrote Dopamine Nation, is that, and then Stephen Kotler in his book, Mapping Cloud 9, he goes over the 5 different neurochemicals. I'm an amateur at understanding the biochemistry, but it has so much to do with it. And so I found other ways where I could feel connected, because I could not, for the life of me, feel okay in the world. And the pain and the angst, which you describe angst in Driven quite well. I always had this angst, and it dissipated to where I still have frustrations, tons of frustrations. I still have the feelings of like, I need to do more, that sort of stuff. But man, my life is the best it's ever been. And if I would have somehow figured that out 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I mean, I suffered a lot.